Today we're looking at the Battle of Trenton. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. In the aftermath of Washington and the Continental Army's terrible defeat at the Battle of Long Island in August of 1776, which they narrowly escaped, by the way, the British under General William Howe took control of New York City and really made it their headquarters. Actually, New York City would remain under British control until the end of the war in 1783. Since the Continental Army had survived, William Howe continued to press them. By the winter of 1776, the British were able to take control of New Jersey and had forced the Continental Army to retreat across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. As winter began to set in, the armies began to go into winter quarters. You have to consider in this time period of warfare, moving troops and fighting generally did not happen during the winter months. You basically, got your army into camp and hoped that you had enough food and shelter to really survive the winter. So, as winter began to approach, William Howe and the British Army settled in for their winter, with the main force of the British remaining in New York City and then other smaller detachments of British troops camped nearby. One of these detachments was a group of about 1,400 Hessian troops camped on the eastern side of the Delaware River at Trenton, New Jersey. Hessians, remember, were hired German soldiers that were fighting for the British. Washington and his army of right around 5,000 soldiers were camped on the west side of the Delaware River, about 20 miles north of the Hessians at Trenton. The Continental Army was at an absolute low point. They had been easily defeated at Long Island, losing 2,000 troops either killed, wounded, or missing there. Then in mid-November, they had lost Fort Washington, having another 2,000 Americans taken prisoner. Now they had been pushed back into Pennsylvania, and many were beginning to question George Washington's leadership and were wondering if he should be replaced as the commander of the Continental Army. Also, many of the soldiers' enlistments in the army were about to come up, and they were ready to just kind of go home and give up. Washington knew he needed a victory and fast. Otherwise, for one, he would lose his command, and two, no more Americans would volunteer to fight, and the whole revolution might just simply be over. There with Washington and the Continental Army throughout this time was Thomas Paine. Remember, Paine was the author of that pamphlet, Common Sense, that had encouraged Americans to declare independence. Now he was trying to encourage Americans to continue fighting, and so he wrote another pamphlet called American Crisis. And here again, Paine put into words the struggles of Americans by starting the pamphlet with the famous line, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." Paine urged Americans to continue to fight despite the hardships. With encouragement from Paine, Washington began to plan a daring attack to win a decisive victory and hopefully reinstill confidence in the cause. On the evening of December 25th, that's right, Christmas Day, 1776, Washington and about 2,400 Continental soldiers began to cross the Delaware River. Now, of course, this is where we get the iconic painting by Emanuel Leutze, painted in 1851, a full 75 years after the event took place, that depicts George Washington heroically standing in the boat crossing the icy river. In all actuality, when they did cross it, it was storming and sleeting snow and windy. The river was partially frozen, and so nobody was going to stand up in a boat and possibly fall in. And additionally, they painted Washington looking as if he's leading the army across, when in actuality, again, he would have been probably one of the last people to cross the river to ensure that it was safe for the commander to cross. The crossing was difficult, of course, because of the snow and wind that had kicked up, and additionally, they were trying to move several pieces of artillery across the river. So the army was not fully across until 3 a.m. the next morning in the early hours of December 26th. Washington was 3 hours behind his schedule, but he decided to push on as the army began to march the 19 miles towards Trenton. On the march itself through the dark and snow, 2 Continental soldiers fell and froze to death. But by 9 a.m., the Continental Army had split into 2 fronts and began to attack the unsuspecting Hessians, many of them still in bed, including their commander, Colonel Johann Rall. The battle itself was fought right in the streets of Trenton as the Hessians scrambled to try to form some kind of a defense, but were caught so off guard that they really couldn't rally themselves. And then Colonel Raw himself was shot down and killed, which sent them even into more disarray. And so the fighting only lasted a few hours, with the Americans easily winning. For the Hessians, or the British, they suffered 1,000 casualties, with 22 killed, 92 wounded, and 918 captured. For the Continental Army, they had only had 5 wounded, and none of the Continental soldiers had been killed in the fighting. This decisive victory breathed new life into the American cause, and the American Army now had confidence in Washington's leadership, and actually over the next 10 days, Washington would carry this momentum by engaging the British on other fronts and actually winning the Battle of Princeton. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.